today we're going to be talking about the voice of God. And we're just going to deal with the basics, because what's happening is I'm getting a lot of questions about how to hear God. But we got to talk about what is the voice of God. First of all, the voice of God communicates more with your mind than anything else. So in the mind, what do you have? You have thoughts. And another name for thoughts is voices. When you hear somebody say, I was just thinking that means in their mind, they heard a voice saying the same thing as what you were saying before you said it. So now we understand that thoughts are voices and they come in our mind. We have to understand who's behind the voices. When you understand who's behind the voices, then you will be able to distinguish between God's voice, the enemy's voice, and your voice. Let's talk about that. So now we have voices that come from either the enemy or God. Now, we don't call him just the devil, Lucifer, because we understand that we don't have one enemy, we have many enemies, but we only have one God. So God wants us to understand that there's a difference between his voice and the enemy's voice, or there's a difference between the voices that work for God and the voices that work for the enemy. God uses angels to give us messages. The enemy uses angels to give us messages too. And another name for angel is just messenger. So the male man could be considered an angel of male. So this is the hour where you got to recognize the difference between the voices of the enemy and the voices of God. And what happened is the easiest way that my pastor had taught me, Apostle Bobby G. McGuire, is that the enemy is always negative and God is always positive. These are very clear distinctions, but the problem is we got to understand what's negative and what's positive. So we have to change the way we think of good and evil. Because if you look at good as just good and you look at evil as just evil, you're going to miss the context of good and evil, because sometimes the enemy will do good so that it'll have a negative result. Sometimes God will do evil so that it'll have a positive result. What do you mean? The enemy will cause you to sell drugs and give you as much money up front with the girls, the cars, and everything you want, but the end result is you end up in jail. So he used something good to have a negative result. God will whoop you, and he will send something to challenge you so that it will push you in a place where you are ready for the next level and the next miracle, the next dimension in your life. He will use something evil to push you into something positive. So evil and good can be considered positive and negative. When you start looking at it like that, then you'll start understanding that they're interchangeable, because they're twins. Good and evil walk together. We ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's a conjunction. It means they walk together. So good is not good and evil is not evil. It depends on the intentions that's behind it. And this is why we got to deal with the mind, because the mind is where the intentions lie. So in your mind, you got to deal with God and the enemy. You got to deal with positive and negative. And you got to understand when to put which in what category. So the basic understanding is that if it has a positive result, it's God. If it has a negative result, it's not. So what do you mean? If a voice comes to you and says, look at that girl, look at that man, and they're not your husband or your wife, and you married, you have lust in your mind, and that lets you know that what is the result of your lust is that you end up committing adultery. So that lets me know that there was an adulterous thought or an adulterous voice that was talking to you. So that voice would be considered negative, and it would be the enemy. If a voice comes to you and says, hey, you need to slow down, you're driving too fast, it's raining, we know that the end result of you slowing down because it's raining is positive. So that we can put that voice or that thought in the positive category, it came from God. It may not be God himself talking to you, because God communicates with angels. He communicates with unctions. He communicates with feelings. He communicates with all kinds of different ways. And the enemy does the same thing too. And this is why this is just a basic understanding of hearing the voice of God. But as we get more advanced and as we go deeper, then we'll begin to talk about the different ways and the different things that you have to look out for. But right now, we're going to stick to just the basics. So the enemy is always negative, God is always positive. And when you begin to understand this concept, then you can apply it to your mind so that you can begin to filter out the negative thoughts versus the positive thoughts, and understanding that what's behind it is what's making negative, what's behind it is what make it positive. So don't always go by what you hear until you understand what you're hearing.